So today's topic, I'm going to talk about TCGPlayer and card conditioning. This is a topic that I really wanted to talk about, being as both a seller and a buyer on TCGPlayer. And they just sent out an email where they're talking about card conditioning. And this is a really big gripe I have both as a buyer and a seller. Because as a seller, whenever I list a card as near mint, most of the time I'm going to list a card that's pretty much mint. The problem I have with TCGPlayer is that they don't have a category for mint cards, and I understand that you can't list cards as mint because technically most cards are gonna have some sort of ding on there, and to have like a flawless card, even if you have like a PSA 10 card, you probably have some sort of like even like a minor scratch, scuff, or something like that. So I understand why there isn't a mint category, but their near mint category right now is so ambiguous. Once we go into it, you'll kind of understand what I mean. So they sent out an email to both sellers and buyers. So for sellers, they went over, okay, they're setting a new standard, so they want people to follow these new standards. And they did like a press release and everything, right? Especially if you're using TCGPlayer Direct. And then they went to send an email to buyers saying that, oh, have you ever bought a card that's near mint and you receive something that isn't? Which, that's a good thing. But when you look into conditions, this is the card condition guide that they have when you go to the help menu, which is sort of more hidden now. And it actually changed. Like, I would say like half a year ago, they used to have a different category for near mint foils and regular near mint cards, non-foils, but now they merged everything together. The issue I had with this, which is why I found it interesting that they actually sent out a card conditioning guide here, is that back then when they separated near mint foils and regular near mints, I like that a lot because even as a seller, when you list the card as a near mint, like a regular card like this Morpeko, which is not a foil card, because normal near mint cards are not expensive, right? It's very hard, a lot harder to damage these cards. Like I could rub like the surface and it wouldn't get damaged, right? But the reason why near mint foils needed to be in a separate category is because it's very easy to damage foil cards, and you could scratch it easily. It gets dented easily, any kind of imperfection, right? Where when you want a foil card, you want something that's pleasing to the eyes. Whereas once it's damaged and you have like a dent in it, it just, why would anyone pay for these? Especially when a lot of these cards, even let's say you get like a Starlight Rare, which is like, hundreds of dollars. Why would anyone want to buy a couple $100 card or even a card over like $20-$30 and have it damaged? It just makes no sense. And that's the exact reason why I have an issue with a card conditioning guide, because it goes over like all this term about conditioning, grading, how they assess it, I guess, on the TCGPlayer Direct form, and then they go over like things like edge wear, which is like whitening on the edges, which I kind of get. That's pretty common. Scratches on a card, and then indentations or bends or whatever it is, right? I think scratches and scuffing and indentation and grime is even scratching or whatever it is. The thing is, when they don't separate these categories by foils and non-foils, this is where you have the issue. They go over like, okay, a point system where it goes over slight damage, minor damage, major damage, moderate damage, right? And then they go over like centimeters, how small, and overall like how much it could cover on a card. And then, points depending on how major the damage is. The problem with this is that if you go by this system, a lot of people on the seller side already don't even follow what near mint and light plate is. Pretty much whenever you buy a card, most of the time I don't have issues, right? But when it comes to high dollar cards, I really think this could be a major problem, especially since it's not forced or mandatory for you to be able to forcing sellers to take pictures of the cards. Because what they list as near mint, again, they don't separate foils and non-foils. What a near mint card could be is it could have minor scratches, it could have indentations, or scuffing on the card. So again, scuffing on the card is pretty much, it could be like a group of scratches. Indentation is literally a dent in your card. So let's just say if you paid a couple $100 for a card, you're buying a Starlight Rare, there's like a dent in your Starlight Rare, or there's like a scratch on your Starlight wear, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be happy about it. But apparently to TCGPlayer with their new standard, then it would be considered acceptable, which I think a lot of sellers are going to try to take advantage of that. Because if you ever shopped on TCGPlayer, if you're buying near mint, you're depending on the card that you buy, you're hoping that the card is near mint and not heavily damaged, right? The problem I see is there's a lot of Pokemon cards, especially like the vintage ones, where people list them as near mint, and a lot of them, even with pictures, they're all messed up. And most of the time, if you see like a light, pretty much like you could assume anything under mildly play card, they're like damaged cards. So these three categories are pretty much like pointless. Light play is like probably like the closest one. It's like open to interpretation. Is very ambiguous. I think that's the problem. What if it's like low dollar cards, like anything under like maybe $10, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. But the problem I have is if you're buying near mint cards and you're buying a Starlight Rare, or you're buying like anything that's like remotely expensive, like over like $50 or something like that, or even over $20 to be honest, I think it's an issue when you could have a dent in a card or a scratch in a card, and that's okay. As a seller, I find those not okay at all. If I, like, let's say for example, I recently opened a pack and it's, pack fresh, but it has any sort of like it had a print line on it, and that's not my fault, but it had a print line on the foil. But to me, for a foil card, if you have a print line or a scratch on it, then that's not considered near mint. There's no mint category, but to me, that would be considered light play, and I would take a picture of it. But to most sellers, if you're dishonest, then you wouldn't let people know that there's like a dent in it or whatever it is. And I think this system really needs to be reworked, where it needs to include foils. I think for near mint cards, okay, if you're telling me it's a cheap card and it's a non-foil, then whatever, right? But if you're telling me someone's buying a foil card and it's an expensive card, then I think that it shouldn't be acceptable that there's a dent or any sort of scratch on it at all. It just doesn't make sense. The only way I could see this being fixed for both the buyer and seller, as a seller, right? You're going to deal with a lot of returns. You're going to deal with like people saying that you deceived them or whatever it is. And then as a buyer, would you really want to buy damaged cards? I think the only fix to this is they need to require pictures for cards from different angles if it's a card over a certain dollar amount. I would say like, between like anything over like 50 or something like that. Because I just don't find it acceptable, especially if you're like a collector where you're pretty much, it's like the Wild West when it comes to card conditioning, because it really depends on, if someone decides to be honest with their card conditions or not. So yeah, that's pretty much just like a rant that I really had. I just found it kind of, sometimes I already feel like it's kind of a headache when you buy cards from TCGPlayer. Most of the time you're probably going to be happy, but depending on if you look at feedback on some sellers or not, some people just have no idea what card conditioning is. Like, at the end of the day, if you're selling cards and then you collect cards yourself, you should know, like, what you would want to receive as a buyer. Like, as a buyer, if you were to pay a couple $100 or you pay $100 for a card, would you find it acceptable that there's a dent in your card or there's a scratch on your card that's over $100? I really don't think so. So yeah, that's my feedback on this, and I really think they need to fix this somehow, or again, like, it needs to probably be mandatory for high dollar cards or expensive cards in general. There needs to be pictures for them. All right, thank you for watching.